The sun burned high over the compound, casting cruel light on the decorated canopies and the long stretch of mats where food steamed in clay bowls. Drummers circled the courtyard, sweating, striking rhythms thick with joy. Guests in shimmering wrappers moved from table to table, laughing, praising, chewing. Women ululated. Men boasted. Young girls threw petals at the bride's feet. But behind them, just outside the circle of celebration, Omalika sat chained to the old wooden post, her ankles raw and her wrists bound to the rope that looped around the cracked wood. Her dress was made of old curtain cloth, patched over with sack thread, and her feet were bare, coated in dust. She had not been allowed to bathe that morning. Her hair was uncombed, left to clump and twist in its own grief. They said she mustn't outshine her stepsister. As if wild hair could dim gold beads. As if silence could quiet the truth inside her. At 15, Omalika was taller than most girls her age, with wide, observant eyes and a mouth she'd been told was too full of itself. They called her cursed because she asked questions. Why the yam barn never opened for widows, why only the favored children received meat, why her father's name was never spoken anymore. She had spoken too much since she was 5. So they taught her with slaps and hunger. When that didn't work, they took her voice by chaining her body. It was her stepmother's idea, the post. She must not be seen, the woman had said. But let her sit. Let her watch, that will kill the fire in her. So Omalika sat. Her back straight. Her chin lifted. Her silence louder than the drummers. She had not eaten that morning. Nor the night before. Her stomach turned, twisted, but she didn't cry. She hadn't cried since they tore her mother's wrapper into rags and told her to wear it like punishment. Children stared at her from the edge of the dancing. Some threw pebbles. One brave girl crept forward with a banana, but a cousin dragged her away before she could place it in Omalika's lap. Don't feed the cursed girl, he hissed. The bride, her stepsister Adiku, floated through the crowd in white lace. She was beautiful, plump with powders and pride. Neck heavy with coral beads. She did not look at Omalika once. But Omalika watched her every step. She counted the number of dancers who bowed when they passed Adiku. She counted how many times the groom wiped sweat from his forehead. She noticed which elders laughed too loud, which ones averted their eyes. She watched the women serve food from the large pots, saw who received fish and who received only broth. She heard everything, even what wasn't spoken. The post dug into her spine. The wood was old, rotted in places, and some of the nails near the base were rusted to the color of dried blood. She knew the story. The post had once been used for tying goats during festival sacrifices. That they would chain a girl to it now said more about them than her. When the first slap came, it was from her stepmother. Omalika had dared to hum, just a single note, soft as breath. The woman's palm cracked across her face. You don't deserve to make sound, she spat. Omalika turned her head slowly back toward the dancing. Her cheek burned, but she didn't flinch. She hummed again, silently this time, only in her chest. The song was one her mother used to sing. Nem said stars blink because they remember. She watched as the bride was led to sit beside the groom. They were fed together, praised together, given gifts wrapped in silver cloth. She saw how Adiku's eyes stayed fixed on the food, never once lifting to look at the man beside her. The groom smiled too widely, laughed too fast. Something felt off. Behind the feasting, she noticed the old dog limping past the yam barn. The same dog that used to follow her father. It had gone blind in one eye but still moved with a memory of purpose. No one fed it anymore. Yet it never barked. It watched. Like her. A cousin passed by and tossed a handful of rice at her face. The grains stuck to the sweat on her forehead. Laughter bubbled up from behind him. Omalika closed her eyes. She did not move. She had learned that movement meant permission. She would not grant them any. Someone poured water nearby. She smelled palm wine on their breath. Another child whispered, "Why won't she cry? She's too proud. She's broken. She's waiting," someone else said uncertainly. The day crawled. Shadows stretched. The drums grew wilder. The dancers twirled in tighter circles, their feet thumping dust into the air. The wind carried the scent of jollof and roasted plantain. By evening the lanterns were lit. Yellow flames shimmered against white cloth and jewelry. The groom stood to thank the guests. Adiku smiled tightly beside him. Omalika noticed her shoulders, stiff, too upright. She had seen that kind of posture before. The posture of a girl who wanted to run but had been told to smile instead. As night fell, a drunk uncle staggered near the post and mumbled something about spirits. He looked at Omalika and crossed himself. "Her eyes are wrong," he muttered. "Too steady." She heard it. She smiled inside. A wind swept through the courtyard. Light but unsettling. One of the canopies shifted, collapsing partially. A woman screamed. The drummers paused, then resumed. But the rhythm never quite recovered. It was then that a child, no older than 7, approached her boldly. He carried a small wooden plate with a piece of grilled yam and a slice of dried fish. He placed it at her feet. "My mother said even spirits must eat," he whispered and ran. Omalika did not reach for it. Not yet. She kept watching. The groom now sat alone. Attica was gone. Whispers moved through the crowd. Had she gone to fix her wrapper? To freshen her makeup? Omalika's eyes narrowed. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Someone began calling for her. "Attica, bride of the moon." No answer. A search began quietly, then not so quietly. They found her near the goat pen, veil torn, coral beads scattered in the mud. Her mouth was open in a scream that hadn't been heard. Her eyes, wide, too wide, stared at nothing. She was alive. But something had changed. They brought her back, shaking. She pointed at the post. "She watches," Attica whispered. "She remembers." All heads turned. Omalika sat unmoved, unmoving. The plate of yam still untouched at her feet. The moonlight caught her face now. Her eyes glowed slightly, not with magic, not with madness, but with memory. Every insult. Every slap. Every stolen morning and silenced night. They were all there in her gaze. The stepmother hissed, "Release her. This is bad luck." A cousin protested. "But the curse." She cursed herself, the woman snapped. "Look." And so they came, fumbling with keys, muttering prayers. The chains fell from her ankles. Her wrists were red, bruised. Still she did not move. "Go," the woman barked. "Go, you thing." But Omalika turned slowly, rose to her full height, and picked up the plate of yam. She walked through the middle of the courtyard. No one dared touch her. No one dared speak. She reached the table where Attica had once sat beside the groom. She placed the food there. Then turned. "I don't forget," she said softly. Her voice was like stone and wind. And she walked away, not running, not hiding. Just walking. Into the night. Behind her, the wind picked up again. A drum split. And in the years that followed, no girl was ever chained to the post again. The cloth gag they tied around her mouth was tight enough to sting. It scraped the corners of her lips, soaked up the salt of her sweat, muffled every breath. Her jaw ached from holding it in place, and yet it remained. They feared what might escape her mouth, not curses or insults, but something worse. Memory. She had spoken once at the feast. Just one sentence. A whisper barely carried above the sound of the talking drums, but it had frozen Attica mid-step and turned the groom's laughter into coughing. After that, they shoved the cloth between her teeth and tied it behind her head. Her stepmother had said, "A snake's mouth must be pinned shut before it poisons the air." So Omalika said nothing. Not with words. But in her chest something stirred. A hum. A rhythm. Soft and steady like a drum pressed against ribs. It began the night after the wedding, when she was still bound to the post. The guests had gone, the lanterns snuffed out, and the compound lay under a thick silence broken only by insects and far-off frogs. Her stepmother had left her chained overnight. "Let her sleep with her pride," she'd sneered. But Omalika wasn't trying to sleep. She was listening. She lay curled against the base of the post, rags sticking to her legs, her hands numb behind her back, her jaw locked by the gag. But in her chest she started to hum. She didn't know where the tune came from. It was not her mother's lullabies. Not any church hymn. It was slower than those, deeper. Something old, something she felt more than remembered. The sound stayed within her bones, reverberating against her ribs, building with each inhale and release. And that's when it happened. The post vibrated. At first she thought it was her imagination. Hunger and fatigue could twist the senses. But it came again, faint but certain. The wood pressed against her spine seemed to pulse an answer, as if a heartbeat had awakened deep inside it. The vibrations didn't travel like sound. They thudded, low, pulsing, patient. She stilled her breath. Waited. Then hummed again. The post answered. Her eyes opened wide. She shifted as much as the chains allowed. Again she hummed. The reply came not just through the wood, but from the ground itself. A dull tremor passed beneath her, gentle but present. The earth was listening. The second night the dreams began. She saw herself standing in the middle of a clearing, surrounded by trees with no leaves. A great circle was etched into the ground, and within it danced women, dozens of them, barefoot, their feet slapping the earth in wild rhythm. They wore red cloth and smeared ash, and their eyes glowed white. Drums beat not with sticks but with palms. Skin stretched across bone frames boomed with mourning and rage. Omalika stood outside the circle. She wanted to step in. Her feet itched to move. But when she did, the women turned, all at once, and she woke, gasping. The post was humming again. Each day they gagged her tighter. Each night she hummed lower, deeper. She did not speak to the others. But the ground began to speak to her. By the fourth night her dreams stretched longer. She saw a woman in red dancing alone, stamping her feet with such fury that blood flew up with the dust. Her body shifted, becoming smoke, then woman again, then flame. Her face was familiar, not Omalika's mother but someone older. Someone ancestral. She sang under her breath too, a voice whispered in the dream. They tried to chain her mouth. But the earth heard. The next morning the soil beneath the post cracked slightly. Just a thin fracture the width of a thread. But Omalika saw it. She smiled beneath the gag. Her stepmother didn't notice. She was too busy scolding the other wives for not collecting enough firewood. But Omalika noticed everything. The way birds stopped chirping when she hummed. The way ants avoided the post. The way shadows bent slightly inward at dusk. That night she hummed louder. The post shook. It didn't snap or fall. Not yet. But it shuddered like a body cold with anticipation. The chains jangled lightly. Her breath caught. She thought the noise would wake the household. But no one stirred. Only something underground moved. The dreams grew darker. She saw drums now, not just in visions but in sensations. Heard them thudding in her own chest. In one dream she walked down a hallway of earth, lit by glowing roots. Bones lined the walls. Some still sang. One opened its mouth and said, "They buried us with silence. But we echo still." Omalika woke with a gasp. The cloth in her mouth was soaked with blood, not hers. She spat it out, trembling. The gag lay beside her, clean as bone. They tied another one on her the next day. But the vibrations grew stronger. Her cousin stopped walking near the post. Even the goat avoided it now, bleeding uneasily. The elders didn't say anything, but some began looking at her with the wide eyes of those who know a ghost when they see one. By the seventh night the dreams bled into waking. She didn't know if her feet itched because of shackles or because she was ready to dance. She mouthed the rhythm against her chest and the ground pulsed back. That night the bride screamed in her sleep. "Stop the drums," she cried. "They're stomping on my chest." The groom wept. "I hear her humming." Only Omalika smiled. She didn't need to speak. Her silence was louder than their prayers. Then came the storm. It arrived without warning. No rain, just wind, fierce and wild. The canopies collapsed. Dust spun in wild circles. A bolt of lightning struck the yam barn, splitting its roof. People screamed. Pots flew. A drum cracked itself in half. And in the chaos no one noticed the post split. Not entirely, but a long deep wound now ran down its side. Omalika pressed her back against it and hummed her rhythm again. A new voice joined her this time, not human, not animal. It came from below, vast and slow, like the shifting of stone. She wasn't just humming anymore. She was calling. Later that night she saw them, in the space between dream and waking. Women of smoke. Men of bone. Dancers with no skin. They circled her sleeping form, feet stamping gently against the ground. She lay in the center, no longer chained, her body glowing with a faint red light. "You've remembered," one said. "Almost," said another. "You've begun the second song." She wanted to ask what that meant. But they only said, "Hum again. We are listening." She woke with the gag untied once more, her lips tingling. Her throat vibrated with something ancient. The post leaned. The chains hung looser. And deep beneath the ground something was stirring, not evil, not good, but ancient and full of unfinished rhythm. In the weeks that followed, Omalika didn't say a word. She didn't need to. People began noticing the cracks beneath their feet. The silence no longer felt safe. Even the birds changed their patterns, circling wider around the post each morning. Her stepmother fell ill. She called for priests. But no prayer held. At night, the woman would clutch her chest and whisper, "I can hear it," that low sound, like mourning. No one believed her. Except Omalika, who hummed her reply. And smiled. The blow came without warning. A heavy, flat slap to her cheek, followed by the crack of a stick against her shoulder. Omalika didn't cry out. Not anymore. Pain had stopped surprising her weeks ago. She only grunted softly, the sound muffled by the cloth stuffed between her teeth. The laughter around her, sharp, brittle, faded as blood trickled down her back, soaking through the rags that barely covered her. It wasn't the first time they'd bloodied her. But it was the first time the wood drank it. The post, tall and weathered, had stood in the compound for generations. They used it to dry yams, hang pots, even tie goats. But since Omalika had been chained to it, publicly humiliated during her stepsister's wedding, it had become something else. Something quieter. And far more ancient. That afternoon, her stepmother had accused her of inviting spirits with her insolent hums. A cane was fetched. Her stepbrother held her wrists while the woman beat her across the ribs, back, and thighs until the rags clung to her skin. When they left her there, panting, half-conscious, the sun hung low in the sky. Her blood dripped slowly from a split near her shoulder blade and ran down her back. It soaked the ropes. Then, inch by inch, it seeped into the base of the post, thin red streams sliding into the cracks of the old wood. And the post changed. Not all at once. But slowly, steadily. That evening, the color of the base darkened, almost black in places. No one noticed at first. Not even the cousins who passed her with their mocking sneers. But by morning the change was impossible to ignore. A goat, usually tied nearby, refused to approach. It dug its hooves into the earth and pulled back, bleeding wildly. When a child tried to tether it anyway, the animal kicked and bit, drawing blood. The child's father muttered something about the cursed girl, and tied the goat elsewhere. That night the music faltered. It was a minor feast, a name-giving for a neighbor's child. The drummers, seasoned men with strong hands and practiced timing, began their rhythm as usual. The dancers moved in spirals, the men in quick feet and the women with long, low steps. But midway through the second round, the beat slipped. Not by much. Just a half-second lag. But enough to startle. They blamed each other first. One drummer glared at another, signaling to fall in line. But it happened again. And again. By the end of the night, the music sounded wrong, too fast, then too slow, always just behind itself. The guest said little. But the whispers began. She's still chained there. Her blood is in the wood. Rhythm doesn't like chains. The drummers tried again the next night in private. But even alone, with fresh skins and careful hands, the rhythm would not hold. Their fingers slipped. Their patterns fell out of sync. And when they looked toward the compound's edge, they swore they saw the post swaying. Though there was no wind. Meanwhile, Omalika lay in silence, her breath shallow. Fever pressed into her skin like a wet cloth. Her lashes fluttered and her lips cracked. The wounds on her back oozed. But still she did not cry. She only pressed her forehead against the post's wood and listened. Because the post was humming again. Not like before, not soft or secret. But low and steady like a drum beneath the earth. Her blood had awakened something. Her pain had colored the wood, and now the wood remembered her name. In her dreams the dancers had changed. No longer furious women stomping through dust, they now moved slowly, sadly, dragging their feet, holding cloths to their wounds. The clearing was darker. The trees whispered. She stood in the middle, arms raised. And they circled her, bleeding onto the soil with each step. She woke to find ants in her wounds, not biting, just there, swarming the blood, crawling gently along the stained wood. She didn't flinch. She simply hummed again and the ants scattered. From inside the compound the mood shifted. Her stepmother stopped clapping at feasts. Her stepsister refused to sit near the drums. The new bride complained of waking up to the sound of chains rattling, though there were none inside her hut. By the end of the week, 2 drums split down the middle. The drummers said nothing publicly. But one came to the post at dusk and poured palm wine at its base, not looking Omalika in the eye. She watched him carefully. He was the only one who hadn't laughed when they bound her. Now he muttered, "Forgive us if you must." She didn't reply. The gag had been removed, her lips too cracked to speak, but she remained silent. Not because she had nothing to say, but because she was waiting for the post to speak first. That night a different rhythm came. Not from the drums or the dancers or even her own chest. It came from beneath her. The ground pulsed. It started slowly like a heartbeat. Then deeper. A rhythm older than footsteps. Older than wood. It matched the blood that had flowed from her spine. It matched the beat she hummed on the night of the wedding. But now it belonged to something more. The wood above her shoulder cracked quietly. A splinter curled outward like a mouth forming a word. The next day a cat died trying to sharpen its claws on the post. 2 children swore they heard voices in the wood grain, whispers in Omalika's voice saying names. Names of those who had watched her beating without protest. Her stepmother began praying more often. The post continued darkening. The stain spread upward, almost deliberate. It looked like veins, black lines crawling up the trunk, branching. The elders began avoiding the compound. The morning the priest came was already strange. The birds had been quiet at dawn, the air sticky and low like a held breath. No one noticed the clouds circling only above the compound. No one, that is, except Omalika, still tied to the post, still wrapped in her silence and the watchful pulse of the wood beneath her. Her wrists were raw. Her back had started to scar. The post had darkened nearly to its peak now, veins of old blood and something deeper pulsing within its grain. She was no longer alone. At night she felt things moving beneath her. Not animals. Not worms. But rhythm. A rumble like the earth thinking, shifting, remembering. It didn't scare her. Nothing scared her anymore. Not the silence. Not the wind that called her name through the grass. Not even the dreams, which came more like memories now, of women chained and spinning, of ground cracking beneath their feet, of music that moved like grief and fire. That morning the priest arrived during the yam offering. He was old. Not the kind of old that trembled, but the kind that stilled rooms by breathing. His staff was carved with unreadable marks, and his robes were patched with ash-gray cloth that whispered as he walked. He entered the compound with the quiet grace of someone who had walked too far and seen too much. People watched him with reverence. They hoped he'd bless the new marriage. Instead, he stopped walking the moment he saw her. Omalika was sitting upright against the post, arms limp but eyes sharp, her shadow curling wrong beneath her. She did not blink when he approached. But he did. 3 times fast. Then he dropped to his knees and fainted. Gasps filled the air. Women pulled their wrappers tight. A child began to cry. The priest lay unmoving for several minutes, his staff beside him. When he stirred again, the sky cracked faintly with thunder. He refused water. Refused to stand. Instead, he looked up at Omalika, and his lips trembled. "She dances like the bound one," he whispered. Everyone leaned in. No one understood. He looked around at the crowd, then gestured to his staff. Someone handed it to him. With slow fingers, he began to tap it against the ground in a rhythm that felt known. Felt old. A thump. Pause. Then 2 short beats. Then a hum, deep in the back of his throat. It wasn't a song exactly. It was something else. The wind moved. Then the priest said, "She bears the mark of Equibellum, the one whose chains cracked the mountain." No one spoke. But a murmur ran through the crowd like dry leaves. Equibellum. Some knew the name. A whisper from childhood stories. A girl bound in the time before drums, before kingdoms. A girl so mistreated that the ground itself rose up for her. A girl who never stopped dancing, not even in death. Some claimed she had no grave, only footprints that glowed in moonlight. She was called the Bound One, the priest continued, because even when shackled, her steps summoned tremors. And the tremors summoned truth. He looked again at Omalika. "She is marked," he said softly as if afraid. "Look at her wrists. Look at her back." Her skin bore the shape of the ropes and beatings, but they had healed strangely. Not as scars. As patterns. Loops in excess like the marks woven into sacred cloths. And on her ankles, bruises had darkened into rings, like ink pressed into skin. No one moved. That night, they let her sleep without chains for the first time. They left her seated beside the post, still watched, still treated like something halfway between shame and spirit. But the ropes lay coiled at her feet. The moon rose. And her feet began to move. It started with a twitch. Her toes flexed beneath the dust. Then her heel tapped once. Then again. A slow, soft rhythm. A circle. A call. She was not awake. Her breathing was shallow, lips parted, eyes closed. But her body remembered something she'd never learned. Her ankles rolled gently, right to left, back to front, looping. She shifted. And the dust beneath her curled in patterns. Someone, hidden in the shadows, gasped. She didn't wake. The wind picked up slightly, though the trees didn't stir. The sky darkened, though the moon was high. From beneath the ground came a dull vibration, not loud but felt. The sleeping goats stirred. The dogs whimpered. She kept dancing. A child peeked out a window and saw her, still seated, body swaying. "She's sleep dancing," he whispered to his brother. But it wasn't just that. She was summoning. That night, in their beds, elders dreamed of Equibellum. Of a chained girl standing on a cliff, arms lifted, feet pounding the earth. Each step sent cracks racing down mountains. Each hum stirred rivers. And her face was Omalika's. The next morning, a line of ants moved in a spiral around the post. No one dared touch them. The priest remained. He didn't eat much. He sat by the edge of the compound and burned leaves. Once, he approached Omalika while she slept and placed something at her feet, a small shell, dark and smooth. Then he bowed. She carries the rhythm of the earth's first scream, he told her stepmother. And if you keep trying to silence her, the earth might scream again. That day, Omalika opened her eyes and spoke her first word in weeks. Drum. It was quiet, barely heard. But her voice held weight. Her stepmother dropped a bowl. Her stepsister stumbled. The wind picked up again. She said nothing else. But that night, her feet moved faster. She began rocking side to side. Her shoulders joined. She hummed again, chest deep and slow. And the ground vibrated more. Children refused to go near the post now. Adults whispered stories with trembling lips. The youngest drum apprentice, a boy of 8, asked the priest, "Will she break the ground like the old one?" The priest only said, "Depends how long you let her suffer." The post cracked. Not loudly. But a fine line appeared at its base, running up through the grain. A fissure. A breath. Something inside stretching, waking. And still she danced in her sleep. Some swore they saw shadows dancing behind her now, faint, feminine shapes, arms raised, feet bare. Some swore the post grew roots into the earth. Some said Omalika no longer needed food or water, that she fed on rhythm and memory. Whatever the truth, no one denied it anymore. She danced like the bound one. And the earth remembered. They tried silence. They tried gags, cloth stuffed in her mouth, strips tied so tight they cut into the corners of her lips. They tried spells, words scratched in charcoal under her feet, whispered prayers murmured while throwing salt in circles. They even tried forgetting her, leaving her out in the yard overnight, chained in cold and darkness. But no matter what they did, Omalika still made noise. At first, it was her humming, soft and low, blooming from her chest like a second breath. They could gag her mouth, but they could not silence her ribs. The hum lived between her bones. It crawled into the floorboards, rose into the walls, and wrapped itself around rafters. It found the cracks in the silence and seated itself there. Then came the heartbeat. It started as something only she could hear, a slow thud in her ears, like the sound of running steps echoing in a tunnel. But after the second week, others began to notice. At night, when the house went still, a thump would rise from nowhere. Faint. Then louder. Then unmistakable. Thump, thump. Like a drum beneath the house. Like footsteps pacing in a chamber no one had built. "It's the rats," her stepmother said. "It's her," said one of the guests. The heartbeat didn't stop. On the third day of the feast's final week, an important guest from the next village over came to pay respects to the bride, Omalika's stepsister. He brought gifts, sat cross-legged on the mat, and praised the beauty of the new wife with all the polite exaggeration he could muster. But as he sat, he began to twitch. First a hand. Then his foot tapped involuntarily. "What is that sound?" he asked, his forehead already damp. "No sound," said the bride, smiling nervously. But the guest's face turned pale. "It's in the walls," he whispered. "I feel it, in my stomach." Then quite suddenly he vomited. He staggered from the compound, clutching his belly. Someone later said his nose bled too. After that, the house whispered of Omalika like she was a sickness. They avoided her corner. Her chains were cleaned less often. They sprinkled herbs around the post, but it didn't help. The noise only grew. When she was alone, Omalika began tapping the inside of her foot to the beat. It wasn't defiance, not exactly. It was instinct. The sound was hers. It came from her, no matter how many lashes they gave her, no matter how many times they slapped her mouth or poured water over her head to cool her spirit. Her spirit was not hot. It was awake. And it had rhythm. Sometimes she even smiled when she heard it pulse. She knew others were starting to fear it. The drums of the village began sounding wrong. No matter how skilled the players, no matter how tight the leather, the rhythm always slipped sideways, as though another tempo was pressing beneath, shifting the music off balance. The dancers lost their footing. The feasts ended early. At night, men argued more. Women dreamed of footsteps and awoke weeping. Her stepmother said, "Move her." But when they tried, the chains burned. Literally. The first boy they sent to undo the lock screamed as soon as his fingers touched the metal. Blisters rose on his palm before he could pull away. "It's hot," he cried. "Hot like a cooking pot." "No fire was near it," another servant whispered. They tried again. The second time they used gloves, thick hide. But as soon as the lock turned, a gust of heat whooshed from the chain like breath. One of the girls fainted. The lock snapped shut on its own. They left her there. That night, her heartbeat echoed louder than ever. Not just a sound now, but a pulse. Objects shifted slightly. A calabash hanging on the wall tipped over without being touched. A baby cried for hours. A chair cracked along its leg. Omalika, still bound, began breathing in rhythm with the sound. Her chest rose and fell. Her body swayed slightly. Her lips parted, not for song, but for vibration. Because now she didn't just make sound. She was the sound. Her aunt, a bitter-faced woman who prided herself on order, tried to command the priest to stop it. "Do something," she said. "Silence her. Bind her properly. Bury her if needed." But the priest only sat near the doorway, fingers pressed to the ground. "She is not singing," he said. "The land is." The next morning, cracks appeared in the floor. Small at first like dry clay. But they spread from the post outward, thin lines curling like veins. And still she thumped. Thump, thump. Even the animals began to act strangely. A rooster flew into a wall. A goat stared at nothing for hours. A cat refused to eat and curled near Omalika's feet, purring to the rhythm. People tried not to look at her. But she looked at them. Her eyes had changed, not brighter, not darker, just still, like deep water. Her mouth remained gagged. Her limbs stayed bound. But her presence, the hum of her, the rhythm of her, filled the house like smoke. By the fourth day, guests stopped coming. Even the bride wept, confused and trembling. "Why won't she stop?" she asked no one. "She's ruining everything." But Omalika didn't ruin. She revealed. Her heartbeat was a call. A counting. A slow awakening. One elder woman came quietly at night and left a kola nut beside her. Another, older still, placed her ear against the post and listened for nearly 10 minutes before standing up with tears in her eyes. "She's not cursed," the old woman whispered. "She's remembering." Remembering what? Whatever we tried to forget. The drums of the village cracked. One by one they split along their sides. No one knew why. Thunder returned even though the sky was clear. Omalika's chains began to glow faintly at dusk, not brightly, not like fire, but like coals buried in ash. The pulse now radiated out from her into walls, into breath. People couldn't sleep. They tossed. They sweated. They heard her in their dreams, even though she hadn't spoken a word in weeks. The post she was chained to vibrated like a living thing. "Why won't she stop?" her stepmother screamed, tearing at her own wrapper. "She was never meant to," said the priest. "You tried to bind something older than your fear." The next morning, the head of the household came with 2 men. "Move her," he ordered. "Take her away. I don't care if you burn the post." They approached with tools, ropes, even knives. But the moment they stepped within arm's length, the chains snapped taut, rising as if yanked from below. The metal hissed. One man screamed as his foot caught fire. No flame, but blackened instantly like he'd stepped into lightning. The other dropped to his knees, vomiting and clutching his chest. Omalika didn't move. But her pulse moved through them. The head of the household backed away, trembling. "What is she?" he asked. "Not what," said the priest, stepping forward. When asterisk. No one understood. But the ground did. The post cracked fully that night. A clean split, from base to top, and a wind passed through the yard that smelled of dust and flowers and something older than the village. Still chained, Omalika opened her mouth, not to scream, not to sing, to breathe. And when she did, the air thickened. And the noise inside her, the one they tried so hard to crush, became a low, endless drumbeat inside the hearts of everyone who ever tried to silence her. And it did not stop. It began with dust. At first they thought it was the wind. The harmattan had returned earlier than expected, sweeping red dust across the compound, softening the stones, smudging the sandals of guests still too afraid to return. But then someone noticed the patterns. Not just smears of dust left behind by wind or goat hooves. No, these were deliberate, formed. Shapes carved into the powdery earth like whispers left behind. The first shape was a perfect spiral, 3 rings wide, each curling tighter toward the post where Omalika still sat. Still chained. Still gagged. She hadn't moved. They checked. The chains were unbroken, the lock still intact. Her feet, bare and crusted from long weeks of neglect, were caked with mud and immobile. Her eyes remained open, calm, unmoved. Yet the spiral was there, perfectly etched. The next morning, 2 children whispered that they'd heard someone running through the courtyard the night before. Bare feet slapping the ground, soft but urgent. They had peeked through a crack in their window and seen nothing. But the sound had been real. There was crying too, the younger one said. And laughter. They were dismissed, of course. Children always say strange things. But the next night, more dust gathered. This time in overlapping circles that met and separated again, like the ripples of a dropped stone. Someone stepped out at dawn and screamed. Dozens of footsteps, small, bare, pointed, patterned the yard. They traced lines like dances, like rituals, like memories. Still Omalika hadn't moved. Her aunt threw water across the dust. Witchcraft, she hissed. Just dirt and lies. But by midday the shapes returned. Without wind. Without footsteps. The courtyard had begun to remember her. And then the crying started. It came after midnight, a thin, quivering sound that rose like mist and fell just as quick. At first only the young heard it. Then the dogs did. Then the elders. It was not a scream. Not a wail. It was a cry full of rhythm, timed in breath and pace. As if someone wept between steps. As if tears had learned to dance. Every morning after the sound, more shapes were found. Spirals. Circles. Sharp lines crossing in silent excess. Arrows pointed inward toward her post or outward toward the gate. Someone said the marks looked like old divination symbols, ones only the oldest ancestors remembered. Someone else said, I dreamed of drums. And still the chains never moved. A brave boy, full of nerves and foolishness, dared to test her one morning. He crept close while the others watched, whispering bets. He lifted one of her legs just slightly, and saw her heel dry, unmoved, calloused in a way that proved she had not taken a single step. But, how? He whispered. Omalika looked at him then. Only once. Her gaze didn't hold anger or sadness or anything anyone could name. It was ancient. It was the kind of look the moon might give a stone. The boy dropped her foot. That night the crying came louder. Feet ran faster. Around the compound, through the trees, into the path by the well. Some said they heard breathing beside them, fast, urgent, as though someone fled while tethered to the earth. One woman swore she felt a hand tug at her wrist before letting go. And in the center of the yard, always, the dust. New patterns each day. The priest returned with salt and smoke, muttering that the land itself was listening. He walked the perimeter, hands outstretched, trying to bless what could not be named. But when he passed too close to Omalika, the bowl of ash he carried split in two. Its contents formed a spiral before anyone could move. She's not moving, he muttered, but she's not still. The ground disagreed. Children started playing in the dust during the day, tracing the spirals with sticks, laughing as they hopped the circles like skipping games. But each time they played, they said the dust corrected them. You have to step this way, said one girl. Like this. She danced with a precision too clean to have been made up. Her eyes glazed slightly as she moved. The adults pulled them away. No more dancing, said one father, yanking his child by the wrist. Not here. Not near her. The ground pulsed that night. A soundless pulse like a breath exhaled in heat. The leaves shivered. The kitchen fire refused to light. And in the courtyard, two sets of footprints appeared, small and large, side by side, dancing in circles. The child and the girl. The memory and the now. People began placing charms under their pillows. Some begged the drummers to return and play something louder, something to drown out the steps. But the drummers refused. We cannot keep rhythm anymore, they said. Something underneath us moves faster. More footsteps appeared. This time they were wet. Patches of moisture, though no rain had come, formed along the spirals. They smelled like clay, like soil, like sweat from a dancer who never stops moving. A goat refused to cross the yard. A hen laid an egg in the spiral's center, then died. And still Omalika remained. Some began calling her Anaha, the bound. Others called her Nwanian Cheetah, the girl who remembers. No one used her real name. Her stepmother tried to bribe the priest again. Cut the chains. Carry her out. Let the spirits chase her somewhere else. The priest refused. She is not the one chained anymore, he said. We are. Even the bride, Omalika's stepsister, once so radiant, stopped wearing her wedding beads. Her husband had not touched her in days. He muttered of dreams in which he danced while sinking into the earth, dragged by wrists he could not see. One dawn, a visiting elder, blind in both eyes, arrived, leaning on a crooked staff. She approached Omalika and knelt slowly beside the post. I hear the girl who dances, she said. I hear her in the ground. She touched the soil. The rhythm, she whispered. It's not a curse. It's a return. No one dared interrupt her. That night, the footsteps danced from the compound to the tree line and back. Dozens of prints, chasing themselves in time, telling stories no mouth could say. One child traced the prints with a stick and wept without knowing why. Another fell into a trance and hummed until morning. The sound of crying returned, louder, more layered. Not one voice, but many. A choir of feet, of tears, of steps pressed into earth as language. They cried for the girl. They cried with her. They cried as her. By the seventh night, the entire courtyard shimmered with patterns, so many they overlapped and gleamed under moonlight. Dust no longer settled. It swirled. It danced. And in the center the girl who did not move. Still chained. Still watching. And yet, moving everything. The sun rose slow and reluctant on the day of the second wedding. Clouds dragged their feet across the sky, unsure whether to bring rain or dust. The village buzzed with forced excitement, a desperate kind of joy. This wedding, they said, would finally cleanse the shame of the last. This wedding would undo the whispers that clung to the first like rot beneath painted floors. This wedding would silence her. Omalika. Still chained to the post, still clothed in rags, her body had grown thinner but not weaker. Her spine remained straight, her eyes clear. She did not beg, did not flinch. Her skin bore sun and silence like it had been carved for them. Some said she did not eat, only breathed rhythm. Others said she had become a drum herself, hollowed by pain, filled with echo. The feast was loud. The stepsister, now in her second gown, walked with stiff grace. Her new husband, this one from another village, one who hadn't seen the first wedding collapse into silence, tried to smile. He looked at her but often looked over his shoulder. Everyone knew why. The drummers gathered early. Young, fast-handed boys from far away, brought in because the last ones refused to play. These new ones didn't know the full story. Just pieces. Enough to laugh off. Just play loud, their leader said, flexing his fingers. Rhythm is rhythm. They struck the first beat as the bride stepped out, and the guests clapped in relief. It held. The second beat came. Then the third. But the fourth stuttered. One hand missed the drum. Another snapped back as if bitten. A ripple of confusion passed through the drummers like water spilled on stone. The fifth beat fell flat. And then they felt it, under their feet. A tremble. Soft. Almost curious. The leader cursed and beat harder. Sweat broke over his brows. The sixth beat tried to recover the pattern but his fingers slipped. Blood bloomed on his knuckles. Behind him another drummer dropped his stick. Blisters swelled on his palm, raw, white, immediate. As if he had clutched something too hot to hold. Guests began shifting. Fans froze mid-air. Children stopped chewing. A woman near the back leaned forward and said, "Do you hear that?" No one answered. Because by then they all did. From the far end of the courtyard, barely above a breath, came a sound. Low, round, soft. A hum. It was the kind of hum a child makes when alone, when wrapping themselves in memory. A hum to keep stillness company. To steady the spine. It rolled like smoke, twined with the wind, carried through skin and teeth. Omalika was humming. They turned to her. Still chained. Still seated. Still dressed in rags now faded to the color of ash. Her head tilted slightly forward, lips barely parted. But the sound swelled. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was a rhythm not made for dancing, but for remembering. For returning. For undoing. And as it rose, everything else fell. The bride, only steps from the altar, staggered. Her leg twisted as if the earth had shifted under her. She reached for her groom. He did not catch her. He was already running. The guests gasped. But not all at once. The gasp came in layers like waves hitting shore after a distant storm. The bride sat down hard on the ground, wedding beads tangled in the dust. She did not rise. She only looked at her sister. Her chained sister. And trembled. No one spoke. The hum continued. Some guests tried to cover their ears. But the sound wasn't in the air anymore. It had slipped beneath the skin. It filled the hollow behind the collarbone. It echoed in the back of the skull. The drums were still. No one touched them now. One sat torn. Another had cracked down its center, would split like a fault line. The silence that followed was not absence. It was presence. Thick. Pressing. Almost visible. Birds that had chirped all morning vanished. Even the goats near the barn pressed to the far side of their pen, ears twitching. The silence had weight. It moved through the air like something with eyes. People began to shuffle back. Slowly at first, then quicker. They mumbled of curses, of spirits, of shame that could not be hidden beneath fabric and feast. Only one person moved forward. An old woman. Bent at the spine, skin folded like paper, she walked to the center of the courtyard and knelt. Her knees cracked. Her hands, scarred from years of pounding yam and breaking ground, trembled as she touched the soil. She didn't look at Omalika. She looked at the post. Then she pressed her ear to it. She stayed like that for a long time. When she rose, her eyes were wet. "She's not the one humming," the old woman said. "The post is." No one breathed. "Her pain lives in it now. Her breath. Her rhythm. You tethered her to it and it learned her music." Omalika stopped humming. The silence did not. It continued, thrumming beneath the ribs of every person there. Someone screamed, no one remembers who. Perhaps it was the bride or one of the cooks who had seen the stew begin to boil without fire. Perhaps it was a child whose feet had started moving without permission, toes tapping to a rhythm that hadn't been taught. Either way, the scream broke nothing. The silence held. Omalika lifted her head. Just a little. Enough. She looked at the broken altar. At the guest. At her sister in the dust. At the cracked drums. At the hands that had once chained her. Then she looked at the sky. As if checking that it, too, remembered. The clouds moved. And somewhere deep beneath the ground, a drum answered. Not made by hand. Not played by flesh. A drum of stone and soil. Of memory. Of shame. Of power hidden too long. The wedding never finished. No words were exchanged. No songs were sung. The guests left in small, scattered groups, walking with heads low and mouths tight. The bride was carried, eyes unfocused, lips twitching with half-remembered hums. Omalika remained. Still tethered. Still watching. But something had changed. She no longer looked like a prisoner. She looked like a root. Unmoving. Unbreaking. A center that could not be undone. And the post beside her? It hummed still. The sky cracked with white fire. The lightning did not hesitate or wind itself into curls. It struck the courtyard with a single brutal line, splitting air and time in silence. It slammed into the old Irako post like it had been waiting centuries to do so. The sound was not just thunder. It was a scream. A release. A name. The post split from top to bottom. Not shattered, but opened. As if it had been holding something tightly and could no longer bear it. As if it had been hiding a breath and finally exhaled. The chains, old and stubborn, rusted and blessed with cruel hands, gave one last groan and fell to the ground like dead snakes. They didn't rattle, they sighed. Omalika stood. No words, no fury, no vengeance twisted her face. She simply rose from where she had been bound for so long. Her body, stiff from years of punishment, unfolded with a grace that silenced the night. Around her no one moved. The courtyard was full. Yes, drummers, priests, aunties with food trays frozen in their hands. The bride still in her veil. Even the wind held its breath. And then the drums began. Not touched. Not coaxed. But played. The first beat came low like a warning beneath the earth. Then another. A pulse. Then another, steady, certain, older than words. The drummers stared at their own hands in horror. They weren't moving. But the drums danced beneath their palms. Omalika's right foot shifted forward. Dust kicked gently. Her left followed, not a stomp, not a gesture, but a step pulled from some old muscle memory buried deeper than flesh. And the rhythm surged to meet her. It wasn't a dance she had learned. It was one passed down through blood, through pain, through silence. The earth rippled beneath her feet. Not a quake, not enough to knock things over. But it shifted. The stones in the courtyard nudged each other. The wooden beams of the feast canopy groaned. Firelight flickered in time with her movement. She danced. She danced with the silence of someone who had screamed for too long. Each motion pulled power from the ground. Her feet carved spirals in dust, drawing invisible patterns that glowed just faintly when the lightning returned. No one spoke. And yet, somehow, everyone knew what was happening. They had chained a storm. They had silenced a rhythm meant to heal. They had humiliated what the earth had once honored. And now she remembered. Omalika danced the old dance. The one of the bound one. The one the priests had erased from history, had replaced with feasts and market days and weddings that meant nothing. And with every sweep of her foot, the lie peeled back. The drums reached a fever pitch, still untouched. Tears rolled down the cheeks of old women. Young girls grabbed each other's hands not out of fear but reverence. They recognized her now, not as the shame of the family but as its thunder. The post, split down its heart, smoldered quietly behind her. No fire. No smoke. Just heat. And in the dust beneath her steps, the earth left words written in ash. 10. The noise that was her name, 800 words, asterisk asterisk. The post was never repaired. They left its two halves standing like old pillars at the edge of the courtyard, blackened and cracked, bound now only by the story people couldn't stop telling. Omalika had walked out after that storm. Quietly. Gracefully. with chains melted into silver loops on her wrists that clinked like bangles. She hadn't looked back. She hadn't needed to. She was no longer the girl tied to shame. She was the beat they couldn't silence. From that day forward, her presence became wind and drum and silence all at once. She was seen only when storms rolled in, lightning streaking the sky, thunder humming beneath feet, and always dancing. On rooftops. On hills. In abandoned roads. Always barefoot. Always spinning with a grace the air remembered. Children whispered that she could hear lies in rhythm. That if you cheated during your wedding, her shadow would be seen in the fire. That if you made a child cry for speaking too loud, her bangles would chime just once, from nowhere. Every village wedding, no matter how simple or grand, now left space at the center of the dancing ring. An empty circle marked with a faint coil of ash or petals. For her, they'd say. Some danced around it with joy. Others stepped wide and careful, whispering apologies. Because the drums no longer belonged only to celebration. They had learned grief. They had learned resistance. They had learned her. And when the first beat of any festival dropped, low, deep, echoing, there were always some who said, "Listen," that one spoke her name. Omalika. It was no longer just a name. It was the noise a body makes when refusing to be broken. It was the syllables carried in wind when joy isn't allowed. It was what bones whisper when they remember how to rise. She never came back to the home that chained her. But the earth beneath it cracked each rainy season. And the post? It bloomed once. Just once. A vine wound up its splintered spine and burst red with flowers, the color of fresh dance, of spit blood, of rebirth. They say those flowers smelled like dust after rain. And they hummed, low and deep, like the start of a drum, like the beginning of her name.